But for me, the biggest factor, because your podcast is so focused on kids, for me, the biggest factor of all the 12 factors that I write about in Style and Focus, for me, the biggest is childhood and the transformation in childhood. And I tell the story in the book, partly through the story of one of the great heroes of the book, a woman called Lenore Skenazy.
She's been on the podcast twice.
Don't you love her?
We love her, yes.
I think Lenore, every now and then in life, you meet someone who you just think, you are the solution. You are the kind of person who, we can all diagnose problems, right? That's not too hard. It takes a really impressive person to build a solution. Mm-hmm. And Lenore, I think, is a key part of the solution. So I tell Lenore's story in the book. So Lenore grew up in a suburb of Chicago in the 1960s. And from when she was 5 years old, she would leave home on her own every morning and walk to school on her own. It was about 15 minutes away. And she would bump into all the other kids who every child walked to school on their own.
Same thing for me.
Exactly. And me, right?
Yep.
And she would, when they got to the school, there was a 10-year-old boy whose job was to help the 5-year-olds cross the street, right?
Oh.
She'd go into the school. I know, it's so cute. And then school would end at 3 p.m. She would leave. She would go and she would play in the neighborhood with all the other kids, right? Freely. And then she would find her own way home at like 5 or 6 when she was hungry. This is what all human childhood looked like, right? Before then, essentially with a handful of exceptions, like when children were made to work in factories, all children played freely with other children most of the time. And then suddenly, in the space of one generation, that ended. By the time you get to the 90s, Lenore is a mom in Queens, in New York. She's expected to walk her children everywhere, to stand and wait and be waiting there at the gate when they finish at the end of the day, right? By 2003, only 10% of American children ever played outside without adult supervision, ever, right? A staggering transformation. And Lenore was very well aware that this change, it's not a coincidence that this transformation happened at the same time as an explosion in children's attention problems, right? Mm. It turns out there are all sorts of things in that childhood that we have taken away that were essential for children to develop focus and attention. To give the most no shit Sherlock obvious example, exercise. Children need to run around, right? When children run around, I mean, it's ridiculously obvious.
It drives me crazy. Like we know that as dog owners, we have to walk our dogs, right? Like, why do we think as humans we don't need that?
So well, Professor Joel Nigg, one of the leading experts on children's attention problems in the world, has shown children who get to run around develop more brain connections. They can think more clearly. We are the first human society ever in the history of our species to try to get children to sit still for 8 hours a day. It's crazy, right? Even if you set aside the exercise component, which we shouldn't, when children play freely with each other without adults supervising them, as Dr. Isabel Benkei, the great Chilean scientist, has shown, they learn how to exercise their attention. They learn how to deploy their attention. They learn how to persuade other kids to focus on things. They learn how to wait their turn. They learn all sorts of things that are just essential for being a person who can focus and pay attention. And we took all that away. But the reason why Lenore is such a hit, and that was even before COVID, obviously COVID then hugely accentuated that. And the reason Lenore is the hero of the book, one of 5 or 6 heroes of the book, is because she is building the solution to this. And it's a solution everyone watching or listening, I really urge you to get involved with. She runs an organization called Let Grow. It's letgrow.org. And what they do, so at first Lenore learned all this and she's like, okay, I'm going to persuade parents to let their kids play outside. And generally she would start by saying to people, what is something that you loved doing when you were a child that you do not allow your own kids to do? And I would urge every parent listening, just think of something. People would talk about, I would go into the woods, I would ride my bike by a cliff, all sorts of things, right? But she discovered, if you're just trying to persuade people, individual parents, it doesn't work. Because if you're the only parent sending your kid out, the kid gets scared, you look like a crazy person. In fact, people might even bring the police, right?
They will, yeah, it's crazy.
So what she did is, what Let Grow does, is they go to whole schools and whole communities and persuade those whole schools and communities to give children increasing levels of independence building up to playing outside their home freely without adults. And so I went to go and look at a load of their projects. I spent a load of time with their projects on Long Island. And I think of all the conversations I had for my book, Stolen Focus, possibly the most moving was with a 14-year-old boy in Long Island. So to give you a sense, this was a big, strapping boy. He was taller than me. And until this program had begun, I think 9 months before, his parents had never let him out of his home on his own. He wasn't even allowed to jog around the block. I asked him why, and he said, my parents are scared of all these kidnappings. That was the phrase he used. This is a town where the French bakery is across the street from the olive oil store. No one has ever been kidnapped in that town. And he had a level of fear that would be appropriate if he lived in Syria, right? And then this program began, and he started to meet his friends outside his house. They started to play outdoors. And I said to him, what did you do outdoors? And they said, he described lots of things. They played ball games. And then he said, and then we went into the woods. And even though our cell phones didn't work in the woods, we still went there. To him, that was a huge deal. And they built a fort, right? And watching this boy describe the joys of building something and being away from technology and being with his friends away from adults, maybe this sounds melodramatic, but it was like watching a child come to life, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought of all the children I know who never get that. Most of our kids, the only place they ever get to explore anything is on Fortnite. So it can hardly be surprising if they become obsessed with the one place they get to ever explore anything. And essentially, Lenore was with me that day, and when that boy left, she said to me, think about all of human history. For all of human history, young people had to go out and explore. They had to seek, they had to build things. And in the space of one generation, we took all that away. And that boy and his friends, given a little sliver of freedom, went and built a fort. There's something so deep in humans. Mm-hmm. We want to do this. And it's such a deprivation. So if we want our kids to be able to focus, and I think we desperately need them to, there's dozens of things we need to do that I go through in Stolen Focus, but one of them is we need to restore human childhood. And I would argue every school in the United States needs to have a Let Grow program. This is a cultural change we can build. It costs nothing. It's free, right?
Yeah.
This is low-hanging fruit. I think you could be the most liberal person or the most conservative person, and you can see the truth of what I'm saying. This is something we can really unite around. We can rebuild childhood for our kids if we want to. And that will have many positive effects. It will reduce obesity, and it will massively improve their ability to focus and pay attention.
Amen to everything you said. Yes. And I love what you point out in Stolen Focus about how, like, with the pandemic, we had been kind of like the frog in the proverbial pot, where it had been getting warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer as far as our lives changing. It seemed like that. Maybe it's just a generation, but it seems like that.
No,
and
totally.
then with the pandemic, we were like, oh, this is really what a completely two-dimensional screen mediated life is like, and we didn't like it, right? Like, it's not like something we love. And so we can use that feeling and that energy, I think, as motivation. Catch new episodes of the Mindful Mama podcast and other free resources, including the Mindful Mom Guide at mindfulmamamentor.com. You can listen to every back catalog episode, including interviews with Dr. Dan Siegel, Iyanla Vanzant, Sharon Salzberg, and get meditations, join our private Facebook group, and more. Go to mindfulmamamentor.com now. I'll see you there.